The smoke detector in my dorm room didn't smell like fire. It smelled like peppermint. That was the first thing I noticed. The scent of Professor Sterling's breath coming from a plastic vent directly over my bed. I didn't know then that he'd been watching me sleep for 62 days. I didn't know my bank account would be drained to zero by noon, or that my own parents would disown me on national television before the sun went down. Right now, I have exactly 9 minutes before the campus security guards, the men paid to protect me, break down this door to hand me over to the man who says he owns me. They have a forged marriage license and a court order claiming I'm mentally unfit. My laptop is a brick. My phone is playing my own private screams back to me on a loop. Everyone I trust has been bought, and the exit gates are already locked. Let me take you back to the moment I found that blinking red light and realized I wasn't just a student anymore. I was prey. Chloe Miller stared at the flickering television screen in her small apartment, the blue light casting long, skeletal shadows against the beige walls. On the screen, Professor Arthur Sterling looked immaculate. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, catching the studio lights, and the scent of expensive sandalwood seemed to drift through the speakers. He straightened his silk tie 1, 2, 3 times before speaking. It was his televised confession, a masterclass in redirection. He spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings and clashes of perspective, his voice a hypnotic, winding corridor of words that never quite touched the ground of truth. Chloe's hands shook as she watched him. He wasn't admitting to the surveillance. He was painting himself as a victim of a digital age he didn't understand. The silence of her apartment was shattered by a heavy thud against the door. Chloe jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Before she could move, the door groaned and gave way. Ethan Wright burst into the room, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He stood with his legs planted wide, his jawline clenched so tight his teeth audibly ground together. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Ethan spat. He stepped toward her, the rapid-fire crack, crack, crack of his knuckles echoing in the small space. The Ethan pop. It was the acoustic warning she had learned to dread. "Ethan, get out," Chloe said, her voice a dry rasp. She backed away, her mind instinctively counting the steps to the kitchen counter. 1, 2, 3. Ethan didn't stop. He lunged, his hand snapping out to grab her arm with bruising force. The smell of his cheap cologne and stale sweat filled her lungs. "You ruined everything. My scholarship, my reputation. All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about Sterling." Chloe didn't scream. She had spent hours in campus safety seminars precisely because she knew men like Ethan wouldn't listen to words. As he pulled her toward him, she shifted her weight, driving the heel of her palm upward into his chin. The impact vibrated through her arm. Ethan's head snapped back, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. She didn't wait for him to recover. She grabbed a heavy textbook from the table, the weight of $300 of wasted education, and swung it with everything she had. It slammed into his temple. Ethan crumpled to the floor, groaning, his hand clutching his face. Chloe bolted. She didn't look back as she hit the hallway, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she fled the building into the cold night air. The campus was a labyrinth of neon green grass and synchronized clocks that were always 4 minutes fast, pushing everyone toward a deadline that didn't exist. Chloe ran until her lungs burned, her breath coming in sharp, staccato bursts. She found herself near the old stone chapel on the edge of the quad, where the shadows were deepest. "Chloe, over here." A figure emerged from behind a heavy oak tree. Sarah Johnson stood there, her bright blue hair looking almost electric in the moonlight. Her fingers were raw, picking at her cuticles with a frantic energy. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Sorry, she whispered, her voice a rhythmic apology to the air. Sarah, what are you doing here? Chloe leaned against the cold stone of the chapel, trying to catch her breath. I have your things. I went to the dorm when I heard Ethan was looking for you. Sarah held out Chloe's heavy backpack. I found a safe place, an old faculty house they use for visiting guests. It's empty this week. As they walked toward the edge of campus, Sarah leaned in close, mirroring Chloe's guarded posture. Chloe, there's something I didn't tell you. Before all of this, weeks ago, I saw him, Professor Sterling. He was standing by the bushes near our balcony at 2 a.m. He wasn't moving. He was just looking up at our window. I thought I was imagining it. But then I saw the light of his phone. The revelation hit Chloe like a physical blow. The surveillance wasn't a reaction to her discovery. It was the foundation of his obsession. He was watching us before I even knew his name, Chloe whispered. The fear that had been a dull ache sharpened into a jagged blade. If Sterling had been planning this for months, the university's involvement went deeper than a simple cover-up. They reached the dormitory under the cover of darkness. Chloe knew she had to go back, just once, to find the physical heart of the intrusion. The room felt different now, claustrophobic. The radiator was hissing, pumping out a stifling 82 degrees of dry, recycled air that made the skin feel tight. Chloe pulled a chair to the center of the room. She began to count the ceiling tiles, her voice a low, rhythmic whisper. 12, 13, 14. She reached the corner near the smoke detector. Something was off. The plastic casing had a microscopic scratch near the rim. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and twisted the device. It didn't resist. Inside the casing, nestled among the wires, was a lens no larger than a pinhead. A tiny, rhythmic red light blinked. A digital heartbeat. It was active. It was watching her right now. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. Every private moment, every change of clothes, every tear shed in the supposed safety of her home had been captured, digitized, and filed away in Sterling's library of secrets. He's seeing us. Sarah whimpered, backing toward the door. I'm sorry, we shouldn't be here. Quiet, Chloe commanded, though her own heart was thundering. She reached for her phone to take a photo of the device, but the door to the dorm room swung open with a violent bang. Dean Michael Davis stood in the threshold. He was a portly man, his forehead damp with sweat despite the heat. He held a digital thermometer in one hand and a Starbucks cup in the other. He glanced at the thermometer, saw the temperature, and immediately dumped the coffee into the trash can by the door with a shaking hand. Miss Miller, Davis said, his voice straining for a fatherly tone that failed to mask the underlying steel. We've had reports of a disturbance, and I see you are tampering with university property. This isn't university property, Dean, Chloe said, pointing to the camera. This is a felony. Davis didn't look at the camera. He stepped into the room, his heavy shoes thudding on the floor. He reached up with surprising speed, ripped the device from the ceiling, and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. On the contrary, Davis said, his eyes darting toward the hallway. This is internal evidence. Under university protocol, all security-related hardware must be processed through the administration office. We cannot have students contaminating a potential crime scene. You're destroying it. Chloe realized, her voice rising. "You're taking the only proof I have." "We are protecting the institution, Chloe," Davis replied, already backing out of the room. "I suggest you take a few days to clear your head. You're sounding unstable." He turned and vanished into the hall, leaving the scent of industrial bleach and sour coffee in his wake. Chloe stood in the center of the room, looking at the empty hole in the ceiling. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended, and it had just erased her. The next morning, the world felt thinner, as if the edges of reality were beginning to fray. Chloe walked into a local diner, the smell of grease and burnt toast usually a comfort. But today, it felt oily and oppressive. She needed caffeine, a moment of normalcy. She handed her debit card to the teenager behind the counter. "Denied," the kid said, not looking up from his phone. "Try it again. There's $3,000 in that account." He swiped it again. A sharp, electronic beep echoed through the quiet diner. "Still nothing, lady. Says, account frozen/contact administrator." Chloe's stomach dropped. She pulled out her laptop, flipping it open to check her bank's website. The screen flickered. A line of white text appeared on a black background. "System wipe in progress." "No," Chloe hissed, her fingers flying across the keys. She tried to force a shutdown, but the computer ignored her. Files vanished before her eyes. Her war chest, the screenshots, the recordings, the years of meticulous documentation, was being eaten by an invisible mouth. Within seconds, the screen went black. When it rebooted, it was a blank slate, a factory-fresh machine that didn't know her name. She was being erased in real time. Her money, her data, her identity, all of it was being stripped away by a ghost in the machine. She retreated to her dorm room, the only place left where she wasn't a stranger. She pushed the door open and stopped. The air smelled of sandalwood. On her pillow sat a single, perfect white rose. Its petals were so white they looked bleached. Beside it, her phone, which she had left charging, suddenly vibrated. It didn't ring. Instead, a voice filled the room. "If I miss a number, the whole staircase collapses. Does that make sense? No. Forget it. The count is 34. It was her own voice. A recording from 3 nights ago, a moment of vulnerability she had shared with Sarah in the dark. The audio was crisp, terrifyingly intimate. It played on a loop, her own fears being fed back to her like a digital poison. "I know you're listening," Chloe screamed at the empty room. "I know you're here." She knew she couldn't stay. She needed to strike back, and there was only one place where the digital ghosts lived: the campus server room. It was located in the basement of the engineering annex, a place of constant electronic whining and tangled black cables that looked like frozen snakes. Subverted Beat 2.3. Chloe arrived at the annex at midnight. The building was a brutalist block of concrete that felt like it was sinking into the earth. She reached the heavy steel door of the server room. This was her best move, the most logical path to survival. If she could get into the main terminal, she could trace the wipe command back to its origin. She had the technical skill. She had spent 3 years as a lab assistant. She knew that every digital action left a footprint, a tiny breadcrumb of data that could lead her to the person holding the knife. She pulled a small plastic tool from her pocket, a shim she'd made in shop class. She slid it into the lock, feeling for the tumblers. Click. The door swung open. She felt a surge of genuine hope. This was it. She was smarter than Sterling. He was a predator of people, but she was a master of the machine. She stepped into the room. The air was frigid, kept at a constant 60 degrees to protect the hardware. The high-pitched whine of the cooling fans vibrated in her teeth. She sat at the main terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys, accessing system logs, tracing remote command 88 Alpha. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 40%, 70%. Chloe felt the tension in her shoulders begin to melt. "I've got you," she whispered. "I finally got you." The trace was working. It was pointing toward a private IP address registered to an off-campus property in the Berkshires. She saw the name. Sterling A. She had it. A direct link between the destruction of her files and the professor. She reached for a thumb drive to save the log. The screen flickered. A small window popped up in the corner. It wasn't a data log. It was a live camera feed. Chloe froze. The camera was pointed at the door she had just entered. In the frame, she saw herself, hunched over the keyboard. Below the video, a red text box began to scroll. "Unauthorized access detected. Federal database breach in progress. Student records and financial aid. Alarm triggered. Campus security notified." Chloe's blood turned to ice. She hadn't been tracing a hack. She had been lured into a trap. The terminal she was using wasn't a standard server. It was a honeypot, a decoy system designed to look vulnerable. By entering her credentials and bypass codes, she hadn't found evidence. She had created a record of herself committing a felony. The screen changed again. A document appeared. A pre-written police report with her name on it, time-stamped for 1 minute from now. The evidence she had just found was being overwritten with lines of code that made it look like she was the one hacking the university's payroll. "No, no, no," she gasped, slamming her hand against the desk. The plastic bit into her palm. She tried to log out, but the keyboard was dead. The heavy door behind her hissed open. A security guard stepped into the blue light of the servers. He was a large man, his uniform straining at the buttons. He didn't reach for a radio. He reached for a heavy, rubber-coated flashlight. "Caught you red-handed, kid," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any professional detachment. Chloe scrambled backward, her chair clattering against a rack of blinking lights. "I wasn't stealing anything. I was tracing a hack." "Looks like a break-in to me," the guard said. He stepped closer. Chloe noticed something. He wasn't wearing a name tag, and his eyes weren't scanning the room for other intruders. They were fixed on her with a terrifying, personal intensity. He lunged. Chloe dived to the left, her shoulders slamming into a metal rack. The guard swung the flashlight, the heavy casing whistling past her ear and shattering a glass partition. The sound of breaking glass was like a gunshot in the small room. Chloe grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. It was cold and awkward in her hands. As the guard turned, she squeezed the handle. A cloud of white chemical powder erupted, filling the air with a choking, metallic dust. The guard coughed, blinded. Chloe didn't hesitate. She swung the base of the extinguisher, catching him in the ribs. He grunted and fell back against a server rack, sparks showering from the disturbed cables. She didn't wait to see if he got up. She saw a narrow opening at the back of the room, a coal chute from the building's original construction, now used for ventilation. She scrambled into the dark, cramped tunnel, the smell of rusted iron and stagnant water filling her nose. She slid down the metal incline, her skin scraping against the bolts, and tumbled out into the wet grass of the alleyway. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air. In her hand, she realized she was clutching something. In the struggle, she had grabbed the guard's lanyard. She held it up to the dim street lamp. The ID card didn't say campus security. It said, David Sterling, Facilities Management. David, the brother, the professor's shadow. This wasn't just a university cover-up. It was a bloodline of predators. Chloe knew she was being hunted. Every person she passed on the quad felt like a potential threat. She decided to lean into the narrative they were building for her. If they wanted her to be the unstable student, she would give them a performance they couldn't ignore. She spent the afternoon in the campus center, muttering to herself, counting out loud in a frantic, disjointed rhythm. 312, 313. She knocked over a display of flyers. She let her hair become matted, her eyes wide and unblinking. She saw students whispering, pulling their phones out to record the meltdown. She was waiting for one specific witness. At 4 p.m., Professor Sterling walked across the quad, his silver hair gleaming. He stopped when he saw her. He watched her for a long minute, his hand going to his tie. 1, 2, 3. He approached her, his voice a soothing, poisonous honey. Chloe, dear, you look unwell. Perhaps we should find you some help. The numbers don't lie, Arthur. Chloe shrieked, making sure the students nearby heard. I know where the light comes from. She grabbed his sleeve, her fingers digging into the expensive wool. Sterling didn't flinch. He leaned in, his scent of sandalwood overpowering. You're playing a dangerous game, Chloe, but I've always enjoyed a bit of theater. He patted her hand, a gesture of faux compassion that made her skin crawl. Don't worry. We've made arrangements for your care. He walked away, a smug smile playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought she had finally broken. He didn't notice that as she had grabbed his arm, her other hand had slipped his leather wallet from his jacket pocket. Inside the wallet, she found a key card. It was heavy, gold embossed, with a single address printed on the back. 14 Blackwood Lane, Great Barrington, the lake house. The drive to the Berkshires took 2 hours. The fog settled into the valleys like a thick, white shroud, swallowing the headlights of her beat-up sedan. By the time she reached the gates of the Sterling property, a torrential rain had begun to fall, the drops drumming against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. The house was a monstrosity of glass and steel, perched on the edge of a black lake. It was a house built for a man who wanted to see everything while remaining hidden. Chloe used the gold key card. The lock clicked with a heavy, expensive sound. She stepped inside. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth. The only sound was the rhythmic slapping of the lake water against the dock outside. She found the library. Behind a shelf of leather-bound books on Victorian law, she found the seam. She pushed. The shelf swung inward, revealing a room that looked like a NASA command center. Dozens of monitors lined the walls. On them, she saw her own dorm room. She saw the library. She saw the dean's office. And there, in the center of the room, was a massive black server, the heart of the spider's web. She began to download the files. The progress bar was a slow, agonizing crawl. It's a beautiful system, isn't it? The voice came from the shadows. Arthur Sterling stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was in a soft cashmere sweater, looking like a relaxed country gentleman. In his hand, he held a remote. I expected you sooner, Chloe. You were always my most diligent student. It's over, Arthur, Chloe said, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. I'm taking it all. The surveillance, the hacks, the dean's payoffs, it's all going to the police. Sterling laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. The police? Chloe, look at the screen. He pressed a button. the monitors changed. They showed a news broadcast. A local reporter was standing in front of a modest house in the suburbs, Chloe's childhood home. In a shocking turn of events, the reporter said, the parents of Chloe Miller have issued a formal statement. They have expressed their deep sorrow over their daughter's mental decline and have publicly disowned her, citing a history of manipulative behavior and digital harassment. Chloe's father appeared on the screen. He looked older, his face etched with a grief that looked terrifyingly real. "We just want her to get help," he said, his voice breaking. "But we cannot support these lies any longer." "No," Chloe whispered. "They wouldn't. I sent them the evidence." "You sent them forged emails, Chloe," Sterling said, stepping closer. "Emails from you threatening to ruin their lives if they didn't pay your tuition. Emails you sent to the board claiming your father was a criminal. I didn't just take your data, Chloe. I took your family. I replaced the daughter they knew with a monster of my own making." Chloe lunged for the door, but Sterling was faster. He grabbed her by the hair, his fingers twisting into the strands. She fought, kicking and clawing, but he dragged her toward the open glass door. Outside, the mud was a thick, black soup. He shoved her out into the rain. She fell, the cold mud soaking into her clothes, the metallic scent of wet earth filling her mouth. She tried to crawl away, but Sterling tackled her, his weight pinning her into the dirt. "You're not going to jail, Chloe," he hissed into her ear, his breath hot against her neck. "You're going home, with me." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a marriage intent form. At the bottom was a signature that looked exactly like hers, perfectly slanted, perfectly forged. "The police are on their way," Sterling said, a terrifying calm returning to his voice. "They received a call about a mentally unstable ward who escaped her legal guardian. When they get here, they won't see a whistleblower. They'll see a sick girl who needs to be kept under lock and key for her own protection. And as your husband-to-be, I'll be the one holding the key." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, a faint, rhythmic pulse through the roar of the rain. Chloe lay in the mud, the weight of the world pressing her down. She had lost everything. Her name, her family, her freedom. She was trapped in a cage made of her own life. Sterling dragged her back into the house, tossing her onto the designer rug like a piece of discarded luggage. He poured himself a cup of tea, the steam rising in the cold room. He began to talk, a long, winding monologue about their future, about the rehabilitation he had planned for her. Chloe didn't move. She sat with her knees tucked to her chest, her eyes vacant. She looked catatonic, but inside she was counting. 1, 2, 3. She knew Sterling's weakness, his arrogance. He believed he had broken her. He believed the game was over. She waited until he turned his back to check the monitors. In one fluid motion, she reached into the hidden pocket of her heavy backpack. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, hand-soldered device, a signal bypass she had built for her senior project. She clicked it on. A tiny green light flickered. The university's safety app had a silent alarm feature. She had written the code for it herself. It was designed to bypass any signal jammer by hopping onto the emergency broadcast frequencies used by the National Weather Service. She didn't just trigger the alarm. She linked it to the server behind her. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was cold. "You should check the other monitor." Sterling turned, a frown creasing his perfect forehead. On the main screen, the surveillance footage wasn't just playing. It was being broadcast. To every student portal at Northwood, to every digital billboard on campus, to the dean's own office. And then, the audio played. "I didn't just take your data, Chloe. I took your family. I replaced the daughter they knew with a monster of my own making." Sterling's face went white. He lunged for the server, but Chloe stood her ground. She held the master key card she had swiped from his desk while he was gloating. "The encryption is locked, Arthur," she said. "And the whole world is watching." The sirens were close now. The blue and red lights reflected off the glass walls, turning the room into a chaotic kaleidoscope. The front door burst open. It wasn't the local police coming for a runaway. It was the state police, led by an investigator Chloe had contacted weeks ago. A woman who had been waiting for the digital handshake Chloe had just sent. They moved past Chloe, their boots heavy on the hardwood. They didn't look at her. They looked at Sterling. "Arthur Sterling? You're under arrest for kidnapping, stalking, and federal wiretapping." As they led him away, Sterling looked back at Chloe. For the first time, his tie was crooked. His hair was a mess. The mask had finally fallen. "You're nothing," he screamed. "You're a girl who counts stairs." 34, Chloe said quietly. "There are 34 steps from the dock to this room. I know exactly where I am." An hour later, Dean Michael Davis was led out of his office in handcuffs. The internal evidence he had tried to bury had been recovered from Sterling's server, along with the ledgers showing exactly how much university money had been funneled into the surveillance project. Chloe stood on the edge of the campus, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. Her parents were there, her mother humming that mournful dirge, her father's face a mask of shame. They tried to approach her, to offer apologies that felt like paper-thin bandages on a gaping wound. Chloe didn't wait for them. She didn't wait for the university board to offer her a full scholarship or a public apology. She walked to her car. She started the engine. As she drove past the Northwood University gates, she looked in the rearview mirror. The neon green grass, the synchronized clocks, the ivy-covered lies. They were all shrinking in the distance. She reached the state line as the sun began to rise. She rolled down the window, letting the fresh, cold air fill the car. She didn't know where she was going, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't counting the miles. She was just driving. The truth hadn't made her whole. It had left her scarred and alone. But as the road opened up before her, Chloe Miller realized she was finally off the staircase. She was on level ground, and the horizon was hers to claim.